Only the uncertain is alive. An operational synonym for the secondary world is, in fact, uncertainty. It is only the primary world, as we have been calling it, it is only the primary world that is set and secure, and it is only the primary that can live in such certainty. But beyond the primary, that which is alive, growing and changing, must be uncertain. But on the other hand, the primary is proper when certain, and the secondary only thrives when otherwise. The secondary world of man would be like a useful sentence. But if its beginning and if its end become permanent and inflexible, then, so to speak, we're all done for. Or if you prefer, how about this? Language is done for, and then you'll be the rat right after that goes down. There is a common, continuing phrase of humanity, all the way from philosophers to people who are obviously not philosophers, just ordinary folk. And the phrase, I'll just wrap up. All of it, from philosophical to religious to just common sense every day, from all those extremes, it normally would fall within this kind of phrase. That men will say things such as, all we can know for certain is that there's really nothing we can know for certain. Now, there are exceptions to this. There are people who are, to make an easy example, to stain it enough that you can start seeing the difference before we get into it, such as fanatics. That there are certain people in life that seem to be exempt from the attitude that there are certain things that we'll never know for certain. There are people who apparently, at the linguistic level, the verbal level, which right now we'll start there, they appear to be exceptions to this. But the ordinary secondary world, intellectual, sane people, all the way from the academically trained in philosophy, even religion, to those not trained who are simply religious by their own basic wiring system and out at some primitive type church somewhere on this planet. This attitude, other than the fanatics, take that as the kind of comparison to begin with, other than that, the general, just decently civilized, enlightened attitude is that there are simply things that we'll never know. But as I said, sort of the classic wrap-up of all the loose ends is to say the only thing that we can know absolutely for certain is that we'll never know everything for certain. That there is an uncertainty built in to what we know. And that goes all the way from science to religion, again, notwithstanding fanatics, which are not the mainstream and not the life breath of life. But now this idea, I assume you follow without being philosophical, because it sounds correct and it would sound reasonably intelligent coming from your own mouth at the ordinary level, to say that the only thing that I can say for certain to myself, to my friends, in conversation, in any seriously reflective moment, the only thing I can say for certain is that there's just actually nothing that we can know for certain. The basis of that has never been outlined, because the basis is very, very peculiar. The basis is part of the same survey of what the secondary world is, as we were talking about more or less last time, in case you think the subject has been completely changed. I didn't think that. Well, okay. Here is the basis that men believe, the phrase, there's only one thing that we can know for certain, and that is that there's nothing we'll ever know for certain. The variations of that. The variations of that do understand in just a wider operational sense what it is reflective of. Is that people, the human mind, is saying, there are things that I do not know right now that I need to know, and there are things I do not know and I will probably never know. But the basis of it is so slippery that a reasonable person who understood this wouldn't attempt to describe it. But being as though a reasonable person would never understand this and hence not be faced with a problem, then there is nothing to compare the folly with which I will press forward. The basis of the feeling. Does everybody... I didn't lose you already, did I? The basis of the feeling that everyone has, no matter what, whether you couched it in religious terms, scientific terms, psychological terms, just everyday term, the feeling that there are things in life that I do not know, that perhaps no one knows, but I know I don't know them. And it does not require some educational background that you feel like it's thrusting you onward to some kind of intellectual search. It's simply a feeling that there are things I don't know about in life that I either need to and or, it's not necessarily one or the other, but and or, these things are not, cannot be possibly known. The basis of that, the extremely slippery, it is so slippery, by the way, it won't hardly stay in a three-dimensional box even for a few seconds, but here we go. The basis of this feeling is quite simple. What it is, in fact, that the mind is saying, the mind is thinking that it actually wants to know, is the inchoate, uncertain future that is arising from the past stuff that they themselves made up. I can take several other shots. Let's go back to the primary, a certain world. Now at the primary level, if there was anything left such as a strictly primary level, which there's not, but we can talk about it as though there were. At the primary world, you would have a man's certainty, for instance, the obvious, or one of the obvious ones, his certainty, a sane, everyday, middle-of-the-road, middle-of-life's bell curve man, a certainty in the primary world that food will satisfy hunger. It's just a certainty. It's got to be, or there would be no primary world. There'd be no life. But once you leave the primary world and go into the secondary world, man continues to feel that there is no way to be certain about what is going on in this one singular intellectual, and of course some of your forefathers or contemporaries would want to say spiritual, but what they're doing is still trying to distinguish between what we're calling the primary and secondary world. When it gets into this singular world, there is, they don't word it this way, but you should be able to hear it, there is absolutely nothing comparable to the certainty, to the certain certainty in the primary world that hunger can be satisfied with food, that the race will continue via sexual relations, that extreme fatigue will be cured by sleep, can be alleviated by stepping into the foyer of a nice-looking building, crawling under a rock. In the secondary world, there is absolutely nothing comparable. It is, in the secondary world now, it is as though men are standing around pondering what is the significance of this mysterious smoke they see all around them, without remembering, without realizing that all of the fires are set by them. It would be like a man's mind wondering continually what's just up around the bend. And what's up just around the bend is his steps that are taking him there. Is it helping? The crudest I could have started with, but I discounted it, but now perhaps we should reconsider. It's sort of like a man always trying to look ahead and know there are things he should, information, things he should know that he does not know. And it's as though he looks ahead, and in reality what he's looking for is his shadow. That is real crude, and I don't like it because it ends up in that kind of polarized, well, we're looking in the wrong way. No, it's not just the wrong way. It is an uncertainty that man feels ahead, that is, things we can't know for certain in the secondary world. But the uncertainty up here is simply an absolute, inescapable, proper, natural outgrowth, as far as we can describe it now, this uncertain future of this past. But the past, I'm tempted to call uncertain, but that doesn't cover it, because this past, that would seem by any reasonable man's mind, has got to either determine the future or at least have some telling effect on it, in a sense does not. Because in the secondary world, in man's mind, man does not remember this. Of course, he doesn't know what to start with. Even if it was pointed out to him in a certain way, he doesn't remember that in a quite real way, he made up the secondary world. Do you understand? And without knowing it, what he is doing is taking something, of course life made it up through man, but he is taking something that the guts, the digestive system, the respiratory system, the sexual organs, that is the primary world of man, did not invent the secondary world. The secondary world grew out of it. Man's mind took all the primaries and turned them into hobbies, turned them into things that sort of gave a purpose to life. Just one of many, 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 many views we could take in describing how it happened. But then the mind does not perceive that, wait a minute, everything I do, I made up. It simply could not. Not the way people are now, because you just go to pieces. I mean, you'd be worse than a cheap suit in a rainstorm. You'd fall apart. And so you look upon, well, people knowing it, men's minds religiously, scientifically, psychologically, every daily, feel as though I am surrounded by a kind of uncertainty. There are things I should know, whether it be about God, whether it be about the nature of life, about a real sense of objective morality, or whether I should go in debt for a new car. They're just things, they seem to be, could drive you nuts. You can stress out. But there are things that we just can't seem to know. But the mind does not realize that it is quite direct and plain. That these things that the mind says, well, we can't know. We just cannot know them. There's a real good reason for it. Because they're based on something that the mind made up to start with. Does that help? Well, I went from, I thought, a crude example to a semi-crude. Do you understand, if we were talking again right quick, which we can describe it, of trying to verbally limb out internally in an individual a primary world and a secondary world. The primary world, there is no uncertainty. There is no uncertainty among jackals, lynx. There would be no uncertainty among man, dogs. Not if you're sane. If you're hungry, you understand. You don't debate. There is no uncertainty about should I eat. It's just ridiculous. It would be if you had that kind of, there was such a thing as a primary hobby and you had that, then life would punish you. Quite severely. Life will tolerate individual self-punishing hobbies, but please note, it does not tolerate it on a large scale. There is no uncertainty at the primary level. And the mind does not perceive that once it gets into the very things that are singular, and again I quite freely admit, and you should be aware, it has heretofore, and still is some nowtofore, apparent bailiwick of religion, that there has got to be something, there's things going on, either religiously or psychologically. There are things going on that we can't quite grasp. I can't quite grasp them. I go to school, I read interesting books, I go to lectures because I'm hoping that there are other people a little more advanced or have a little more insight than I do. It's a nice hope. It's a nice wish. It's a nice hobby. But you understand, it is taken at the ordinary intellectual level as something objective. And don't just poo-poo religion and say, well, it's not objective, because it's the same thing about science, it's the same thing about psychology. If you want to consider it a semi-hard science. Of course, I hate to get into the sexual prowess of certain disciplines and hobbies in life. But the mind, without any analyzation, in fact, it would be counterproductive if it could do so, the ordinary old intellect. But without any sort of this kind of cold-blooded analysis from a different view, it simply accepts the fact. Any reasonable person on this planet has always accepted the fact that there are things we do not know. I mean, you got to accept that. Anybody. If nothing else, you ask a guy who is a redneck, uneducated bricklayer in Mesopotamia 5,000 years ago, what happens after death? And he says, you know, give me a break. How the hell do I know? I don't know. There's some things you don't know. So there's always that. Well, what do you think tomorrow will bring? I don't know. I can't afford a soothsayer, so I don't know. When do you think your wife left you? I'm not sure. The first one or my fifth one? Well, when did all of them leave you? Well, that's really, I don't know. It's that kind of thing. No one but a fanatic. A man would be pinned to the secondary wall if a man stood up and in some way could initially pass for sane and say, I know exactly what is going on. I know everything. I can answer all questions. I mean, by then the room's going to be cleared out. Well, all the sane people, they're going to find some reason, well, I got to go have my watch fixed, or, you know. It is simply the nature of life that there are things that are uncertain. But notice, it is a quite clear category. So I'm afraid some of you are taking this too convolutedly. Of course, I could be broadcasting from station WCOV, CONV. The division is quite clear-cut. Just take the kind of thing that by now I'm sure you can do and see the useful operational validity thereof. You can see that there is no question of needing additional knowledge if we're talking about the primary world, if we're talking about the very things, the absolutely inescapable, irreplaceable, unavoidable things that would keep you somatically, physically alive. Nobody has a question. Nobody has ever said, since man has been talking, no one's ever said, no sane person. That is, nobody that's in the middle of life's non-self-punishing hobbies. No one has ever said, some of my neighbors wonder what happens after you die. Childish fools. What I want to know is, what's the information that we yet have, or yet to be revealed to us, regarding eating? I mean, You're hungry, you eat. And if you're so stupid that it took experience to teach you, all it took was once. One time you were hungry and somebody said, try eating. And you went, well, I kept taking naps, and I kept screwing, but eating, you say, yes, try it. Just try it. And a man tries it, and if he is at all sane, he goes, silly me. So there's no other question. He doesn't wonder. Later, he didn't go back to whoever taught him how to eat or told him to, and go back and say, that was so good. Is there any kind of like secret information in that? Is it, is there something you're holding out on me? The conspiracy going on. It's idiocy. You hear that. In the primary world, operating at that level, which is silent, which you do not think about, and there's no need to if you're just sane, which we'll assume all of you are. But notice that it would not, even if you did talk about it, if you did stop and think about it, you couldn't go any further than I just did for you. To realize that this is a place that even Captain Irony would get embarrassed, either that or be out of work, because things do not turn on themselves. The primary, if they do, it is suicidal. It is self-destructive. Humanity would be killing itself. You'd be killing yourself individually, and hence not qualify for being the sane example of which I believe I was speaking. So at the primary level, there are no uncertainties. There are no questions about anything, all the way from God to the purpose of life. The purpose of life at that level is life. The purpose of life at that level is to stay alive. Then the mind, which seems to people still, as you know, it seems to be something, even though it's stuck in your head more or less, it seems to be something that is in some way quite different than the body. I mean, that's the common wisdom out there in the street, but of course the common wisdom out there in the street is, the Giants may still win the pennant, or that you can trust an insurance salesman. I don't know. You simply understand the common wisdom because it's in you. When they speak about the dichotomy, the division between mind and body, and how mind can affect body, and how body can affect mind, and is this over here actually a psychosomatic problem, or is it a real problem? And all you got to do is just halfway listen with your halfway city ears. You're nodding along like it's follow the bouncing ball, yeah. When it's not. Not if you can think in any sort of new way. It is not whatsoever. Thus, I assume you see that it's unavoidable to note that at the primary level, if there in some way it could operate somewhere close to secondary, if it was vocal, it would have no uncertainties. It has no questions. It has no feeling that there is something yet to be known. It knows everything it needs to about primary existence. Where do the questions come from? Where does the feeling, people normally call it, most often, the feeling of uncertainty, the belief, the accepted belief, the sensation that there are things that I do not know. There are things that perhaps no one knows. There are things, at least that my neighbors, my family, there are things that perhaps humanity will never know, but it's always a comma there because the feeling is anybody that would even say that is at least tacitly saying they should be known. There's something in me that wants to know what it is. Why is it so strange? Why have we had 5,000 years of Western history, and in a sense we seem no closer? And that passes for intelligence. Nobody will play the one more question and say, wait a minute, that part itself is one of the damnedest questions I ever thought about. Why is that? And the partner in you that had done the first one would go, I say I'm about to drag some of you down. Never mind. Anyway, the partner would go, wait a minute, do you mean the question? And you say, no. Why is it nobody's noticed the question before? See, ordinary intelligence would say, boy, these are some powerful questions. These are some deep mysteries, such as the meaning of life, for instance. These are some deep mysteries evidenced by, in that, proof of, by the fact that for 5,000 years, no one's been able to answer it. And that's when it looks like a conclusion, like a man made an intellectual, absolute, sterling point. And in ordinary intelligence, there's no other voice to go, wait a minute, I heard that. But forget that. Go further. Let's ask one more question. Not only, I agree with you. I know what you're saying. I've read enough that, yeah, I agree that men for 5,000 years have had these several questions, or several dozen, but they've had at least one question that they cannot answer. Yeah, I understood that. I understood what you said. But how come no one thinks, well, wait a minute. Even without having the young prince from Copenhagen, something still stinks up here in Jutland. Something's rotten in Denmark. Something's wrong with the question. You know, not that it can't, that nobody has answered it yet, but doesn't it strike you peculiar that the question keeps going on and nobody gets any closer? Okay. Back on the main road. We've been to that before, and it always has the same kind of exhilarating success, evidently. It is only this end, and it's as physical as eating and sleeping and screwing. This end of the nervous system up here, where we're all feeling as though we exist as individual, as fish, not out of water, but fish by God, who know the difference between ourselves and water, between I and not I. It is up at this point, and only at this point, not in the liver, not in the stomach, not in the lungs. It is only at this point that comes the idea, that comes the energy sensation that there are things we will never know, are. There are things I do not know, and I should know. There's just no doubt. I mean, anyone who says there are things I don't know, in whatever tongue, whatever phrase they use themselves, they are also saying they should know it. Or they wouldn't be wired up to say the first part. They would not be part of the middle class of life's large neighborhood. But they cannot see that this, in a sense, invented everything that it knows. That all discoveries are at least in part inventions. We did that last time. If you got any better, skip the at least in part. Everything that man discovers is an invention. The secondary world, in that sense, is an invention vis-a-vis sex, eating, the simple primary continuation of the race. Compared to that, all of this is an invention. It's not wrong. You know that. It's not questionable. If it wasn't for that, everybody'd be nuts. If it weren't for that, everybody would still be primary. But this has invented the secondary world. Absolutely. The livers, the kidneys did not invent it. The genitals didn't invent it. Your stomach didn't invent it. This invented all of that. And it is only in that this goes, there are things that I do not know. There are things I do not know that I must know. And it's quite serious. That's what got all of you people involved with whatever the hell this is, one way or the other, is there things I want to know. But in the place where it's looking, it's like I'm surrounded by this mysterious smoke. And if I could just part it, if I could in some way condense it, if I can get through it, or if I can just stand back in some way and begin to, in some great way, dive into the metaphysical, transcendental, symbolic significance of this smoke. And all of that's on the basis of not understanding that this set every fire that exists. It's the mind, without knowing it, saying there are things I cannot know. And in that sense, it's true. Because what it says it cannot know is simply extensions of what it made up. Do you follow? How in the hell can it know it? Now, ordinary minds, of course, don't say that. But everything that's here in the mind, in the sense that we're saying now, your mind, everybody's mind, of course, did it collectively, but let's say with an individual, right quick. Everything that this knows, it made up. So after that first day, after that first word, after that first sentence, that this thing had a secondary world, that you became literate, verbal, you became a human. As soon as this happened, all of this you invented. In just a few seconds, maybe a weekend later, you, Adam, everybody began to think and feel, there are things that I do not know. It's like, now I got this thing going, it's like a new toy, it's like a whole new world, but something's missing. And of course they call it God and religion, morality, and then those at the edge fall off into drugs and other things, but it is the absolute drive that there are things I do not know. The unsaid part being, and I need to. But do you understand, at that basis of saying, well, there are things I don't know, I've got to find, it is Mootsville. Because what it thinks it is missing is simply outgrowths of what it invented. To try and stay in the 3D world right quick and symbolically, what it invented back here, and now it's looking like the great mysteries. The things I don't know. And what it don't know is, it made up stuff, but it didn't make up everything. And so what it hadn't yet made up, it thinks of as being the great mysteries of life. Well, finally, do you see the beauty? Do you see the efficiency? We've hit it in other ways before, but this is right down to the core of it. It's not right, wrong, it's just efficiency on the hoof. No offense to you people who have bovine-style feet, but figuratively speaking. In one sense, if you can see, the old ordinary intellect, the street level perception of the ordinary mind, is that these things that are lacking, these things that man does not know, these things that he ponders, to him they are nouns. But they are in fact verbs at that level. That is what I was attempting to point out, that besides seeking the mystical significance of smoke while not knowing that the mind itself set all the fires, was the other one I said. It's like the feeling, literally and figuratively, of the mind always wondering what's around the next bend. And what does the future hold? Where am I going? Where is humanity going? But what is just over the hill? What's around the bend? The future is a noun. The idea of life after death is a noun. Everything that man believes he does not know, everything that's uncertain, no matter how you start out and gave a off-the-cuff response, perhaps, if I ask you, speaking generically, if it came out less than a direct noun, if I asked for any clarification about, well, what do you mean, it would get down to a noun, to a thing, such as knowledge, things I do not know, questions that I need answered. But it's always on the basis that it is a noun, or a string of nouns, but it is a thing. And the other picture I was trying to use of men continually wondering what's just around the bend, I can tell you, except that, well, I can tell you, not you. What's just around the bend is your footsteps carrying you there. So how can you ever, at the ordinary level, how can the mind ever say, well, I know what's coming up? How can it ever answer the questions it has that seem unanswerable? Because it is the one who asks the questions. But all the questions now, after the first word, after the first time that God bent over and coughed, since then, every thing that the mind has said has been an invention based on what it's already invented. But the unanalyzed assumption, the working, operational mechanics of life is that these questions, maybe I can't answer them, but these questions are real. These worries, these concerns that I have, that all civilized men have, are something definite. I can put them in definite words, says ordinary life, intelligence. What comes after death? What is the meaning of life? Where is God? Why am I here? Those are specific questions. Those are not vague, but they're based on, compared to any primary aspect of life, they are based original. The foundations, the pilings driven into the ground, the very foundations of the secondary world. I guess about the most we can say that in a subversive dictionary, if you look under vagueness, there it would be. Those pictures, that is the basis. But the mind does not see it, and it is convinced. People go around and they do this, and they screw up their face, and they study, and they write, trying to narrow down, either scientifically, psychologically, metaphorically, narrow down somewhere closer to getting a real grip, coming up with a real answer, perhaps someday, to these questions. The questions, do you understand, should be the picture, or an arrow saying, see vagueness, see uncertainty. Because that is what they're all based on. Do you see a certain amount of don't hold your breathness in the, well, perhaps someday I'll see this answer, perhaps someday I'll find it? There's nothing to find. We'll have to cut it. Did all that get on tape?